I was nothing in Black Hollow, a widow from the lower quarter, a forgotten omega raising a dying child, the kind of woman powerful wolves never see unless they need something. Then the Alpha summoned me before dawn. He is dying, he needs an heir, and in exchange for my son's life he wants my name, my body, and my place at his side. I should have refused him, but survival does not care about pride. So I agree to a contract that chains me to the most dangerous wolf on the mountain. Then everything fractures. The moonstone does not merely accept me, it recognizes me. I am not just his mate. I am the bloodline his house buried, the truth his father tried to erase, and the one female his wolf cannot control. Now the same wolves who ignored me are hunting my child. The Alpha asked for an heir. Instead, he chose a woman who will either save his legacy or burn his entire mountain to the ground. Prologue. The morning, the mountain changed. The first frost did not arrive like a warning. It settled over Black Hollow quietly, silver threading through pine roots and glazing the lower paths in a brittle sheen that cracked beneath careless boots. Smoke rose from the lower quarter in thin, weary lines. The air held damp earth, ash, and the old hunger that always reached the poor before winter fully declared itself. Leora Voss climbed the ridge before sunrise with a basket braced against her hip and exhaustion buried so deep behind her eyes it had become part of her expression. Inside the basket were boiled cloths, pressed shirts, and bitterroot salve she had finished in the dark while her son burned with fever beside the hearth. She had not slept. Cassian's fever had broken once and returned sharper. He had coughed into cloth and tried to hide it from her afterward, as if he were old enough to understand death and young enough to think protecting her from it was still possible. He was 6, too young to bargain with pain, too old not to recognize it. The path to the Alpha house curved upward through black stone and thinning trees. Leora took each step with the kind of care hardship taught early, the kind that made a woman place her feet, as if the ground itself might punish carelessness. She had lived in Black Hollow all her life. She knew what she was there, lower quarter, widow, useful, invisible. That last part had kept her alive. It should have kept her safe. Stop! The command cut through the morning cold. Leora froze. A guard stood at the gate with his breath fogging white in the air, his hand resting near the hilt at his side. His gaze swept over her once before settling into something harder. The Alpha is expecting you. The words hollowed the air around her. Me? Yes. No explanation followed. No courtesy, only fact. Leora adjusted the basket in her arms and continued up the final rise. The Alpha house stood against the mountain like something carved from dominance rather than built by mortal hands. All black timber, ironwork, and old authority sunk deep into stone. The doors stood open. Warmth met her first, then scent. Cedar, steel, male wolf, and beneath it something wrong, blood. Her steps slowed before she could stop them. Something was wrong in that house, and she knew it before she crossed the threshold. The main hall stretched long and dim beneath heavy beams, firelight moving along carved pillars and polished floors. No servants moved through it. No attendants waited. No witnesses had been left in place. Only him. Alpha Ronan Thorn stood beside the hearth with one hand braced against the stone as though the room might tilt if he let go. He looked exactly as he always did from a distance, broad-shouldered, severe, dangerous in the effortless way only truly powerful wolves ever were. Black shirt, gold eyes that missed very little. He looked like the kind of male laws were written around. He also looked like a male forcing his body to obey him through sheer discipline. Leora Voss, he said. His voice was steady, too steady. Alpha, come closer. She obeyed, not because she trusted him, but because refusing an Alpha in his own house was not survival, it was provocation. She set the basket down near the door. What do you need, sir? He studied her in silence for a beat too long. Not the way a male looked at a servant. not the way a powerful wolf looked at a lower-ranking female whose existence barely crossed his mind. He looked at her as if measuring something that had only just become important. "You have a son," he said. The words landed without warning. Leora went still. "Cassian," she answered carefully. "He collapsed yesterday." The room shifted under her feet. He was not meant to leave the cottage. He told the attendant he was strong enough. Of course he had. That sounded like Cassian. Too brave, too proud. Too much like her in all the ways that made survival harder. Leora forced her hands to remain quiet at her sides. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I ordered the report." "Why?" Ronan held her gaze without softness. "Because your son is dying." The sentence did not break. It cut, clean, controlled, final. Leora did not move. If she moved, she would shatter, and she had learned a long time ago that breaking in front of power only taught it where to press harder. "If he remains here," Ronan continued, "he will not survive the winter." The fire cracked behind him. The sound felt distant, almost unreal. "What are you asking from me?" she said. Something changed in the room. Ronan moved closer, and the air tightened with him. He carried dominance the way other wolves carried weapons. With so much familiarity it became part of the silence around him. Then the impossible happened. A violent pull tore through the center of Leora's chest. She sucked in a breath. Her wolf, quiet and buried for years beneath widowhood, hunger, grief and endurance, surged awake with sudden brutal force. Ronan stopped at the exact same instant. His face hardened by a fraction. He felt it too. The bond slammed between them, raw and undeniable. Mate. The word did not rise like comfort. It rose like a wound. Wrong timing, wrong life, wrong everything. Ronan's voice dropped lower. "I am dying." Leora stared at him. "The physicians gave me 6 months," he said. "Less if winter worsens." The ground steadied again, not because the truth softened, but because something inside her locked into place. "I need an heir." There it was, the real reason. "I need a lawful mate," he continued. "A child born under my name before I die." "And in return?" she asked. His gaze did not move. "Your son leaves for the capital tomorrow. He will receive the best treatment my territory can buy." Silence filled the hall so completely Leora could hear the blood in her ears. Marriage, an heir, the Alpha house, her son, the bond, the cost of all of it. "And if I refuse, he still goes." That hit harder than the bargain itself. "Why?" Ronan's expression sharpened into something colder than kindness. "Because I will not let a child die in my territory when I can prevent it. Not mercy, not generosity, principle. That was worse. Kindness could be dismissed. Principle created debt." Leora held his gaze through the pull of the bond and the sharp, sick fear trying to claw its way up her throat. "What do you gain from choosing me?" For the first time, he hesitated. It lasted only a heartbeat. But in a male like Ronan, one heartbeat was an admission. "If I wanted convenience," he said quietly, "I would have chosen someone else." That was all the confirmation she needed. The bond was real. It had arrived too late. And he was standing in front of her offering marriage like a contract because death had found him before fate did. "How long do I have?" she asked. 5 days. Too long, too short. Cassian would leave tomorrow. The decision would not. Leora bent, lifted her basket again, and made herself stand straight beneath the weight of it. 5 days, she repeated. She turned and walked out of the Alpha house without waiting for dismissal. Frost bit at her face the moment she stepped outside, but the cold felt simple compared to the ruin he had just placed in her hands. As she moved back down the ridge, the mountain remained outwardly unchanged. The trees still stood, smoke still rose. The lower quarter still huddled under winter's mouth, but Black Hollow had already begun to shift around her in ways none of them fully understood yet. because the Alpha had not merely chosen a mate. He had awakened something his house should never have buried. Chapter 1. The Child and the Bargain. By the time Leora reached the lower quarter, the frost had begun softening into snow. It came lightly at first, drifting through the pines in thin white threads and settling over the cottage roofs, like something almost gentle. Black Hollow always looked kinder from a distance, once winter dressed it in silence. Up close, the lower quarter told the truth. Lean chimneys, patched walls, narrow paths turned slick under bad weather, lives held together by labor strong enough to survive neglect and too tired to call itself strength. Leora stepped onto the path to her cottage and saw Mara waiting on the porch. The older woman rose too quickly from the chair she kept by the door, blanket slipping from one shoulder. Her lined face changed the moment she saw Leora's expression. What happened? Leora did not answer immediately. She climbed the porch steps, set the basket down near the door, and forced her voice into something steady enough for the room ahead. Is he awake? Mara nodded once. He asked for you twice, then he slept again. Relief hit first. Fear followed so closely behind it barely deserved its own name. Leora pushed open the door and entered the cottage. The room was small, clean and warm, only where the fire reached. Shelves lined one wall with dried herbs and jars of salve. A narrow table held folded cloths and half-finished mending. The good chair sat nearest the hearth because Cassian needed the heat more than anyone else. Their whole life fit inside these walls without excess. That had once humiliated her. Later it had simply become fact. Now, with the Alpha's bargain still moving like a blade through her thoughts, it looked painfully fragile. Cassian lay under 3 blankets near the fire, with one thin hand resting over his chest. He opened his eyes when she knelt beside him, and the smile that touched his mouth nearly undid her. How do you feel? He gave the brave answer first because he was her son. Better. Leora said nothing. His smile faded into honesty. My chest hurts. The room tightened. She sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand carefully, feeling how light it was in hers. The Alpha sent for me this morning, she said. Cassian's grey eyes widened a little. Even sick, he was still a pack child. He understood what the Alpha meant in a place like Black Hollow: authority, distance, consequence. Did I do something wrong? No. The answer came too fast, too sharp with love. She gentled it before continuing. You did nothing wrong. He studied her face in the solemn, wary way sick children often learn too early. Then why? Leora looked at him, at the fire, at the patched blanket pulled to his throat, and understood with fresh cruelty that there was no careful version of this conversation that would spare either of them. The healer told the Alpha your lungs are worsening, she said. There are physicians in the capital who may still help you. He is sending you there. Cassian blinked. Then he looked down at their joined hands. With you? There it was. The true wound, clean, immediate. Leora kept her grip steady. Tomorrow night. He took that in quietly. Then, because he had inherited too much of her, he asked the harder question instead of the easier one. Why would he do that? Because he is dying. Because he needs an heir. Because fate arrived too late and made the bond into cruelty instead of blessing. Because the mountain never gives without taking. Leora swallowed. He offered help. Cassian's gaze lifted. He was too young to understand politics, but not too young to hear the missing piece. What does he want? Before she could answer, a hard knock struck the door. Mara moved first, but Leora rose and reached it before the older woman could. When she opened it, Beta Selwyn stood outside with 2 warriors behind him and 2 supply sacks at their feet. Cold air swept in around him. He filled the doorway with dark wool, iron authority, and the clipped stillness of a male who was accustomed to bringing order into rooms where emotion would only slow the work. He looked once past her shoulder toward the bed by the fire. then returned his gaze to her face. "Leora Voss, Beta, the Alpha has sent provisions for your household and medical supplies for your son's journey." One of the warriors lowered a cedar box onto the porch. The other set down fur bundles, dried meat, grain, and a wrapped packet that smelled sharply of fever root and silver bark. Leora stared at them for one beat too long. This was no vague promise. Ronan had already put his bargain into motion. Selwyn's voice remained level. "The physician assigned to the north route arrives before dusk. The wagon leaves tomorrow after moonrise. Your son will travel under armed escort. The Alpha moves quickly. The Alpha does not wait for weather to close over a dying child." The words hit hard because they were true and because they carried no softness to hide behind. Selwyn was not trying to comfort her. He was telling her the mountain had shifted, and that the shift had already begun moving around her life, whether she had chosen it or not. She folded her arms against the cold. What price did he tell you he named for this kindness? Something unreadable passed through the Beta's eyes. So, he knew. Of course he did. "That is between you and him," he said. The older warrior set the cedar box inside the threshold. Selwyn nodded once toward it. "The medicine inside will lower the fever until the physician arrives." Then, after the briefest pause, he added, "For what it is worth, the Alpha has not sent provisions to a lower quarter household in 12 years. Leora met his gaze without blinking. Then perhaps Black Hollow should ask itself why it took a dying child to remind its rulers that we exist. Selwyn held her eyes for a long second. Something like approval sharpened and vanished. Perhaps it should. He turned and left with the warriors before the conversation could become anything softer or more dangerous. Leora closed the door and stood there a moment, with her hand still on the wood. Then she carried the cedar box to the table and broke the black wax seal. 3 glass vials lay nested inside padded cloth, filled with silver-blue liquid that caught the firelight like captured moonlight. Lunar medicine, rare, costly, powerful enough that no healer in the lower quarter would have wasted it on a child they expected to lose. Relief hit her first, and so hard she had to brace one hand against the table. Then came the second wave, not gratitude, obligation, no, worse. Power entering her life with precision and expecting her to build a decision around it. She took one vial, measured the drops into warm water, and brought it to Cassian. He swallowed obediently, grimacing at the bitterness. Some of the strain in his face eased within minutes. Not enough to call hope. Enough to call movement. He leaned back against the pillow and looked at her again. "Will I really go tomorrow?" "Yes. Will you come later?" The question was quieter now, more careful, as if he already suspected that the answer cost her. Leora sat beside him again. "I will find my way to you." It was not yet a promise. It was a vow still taking shape. Cassian seemed to understand that. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "You look angry." A breath almost like a laugh escaped her. "Do I?" He nodded. "At the Alpha?" Leora smoothed the blanket over his chest. "I am thinking." That satisfied him more than some sweeter answer would have. Cassian had learned young that adults often called terror by gentler names when children were listening. By afternoon, the snow had thickened. The physician came, examined Cassian, administered another dose, and confirmed what Ronan had said. Travel now, or lose the chance entirely. Mara packed the small things a sick boy would want, his warmest shirt, the carved wooden wolf he slept with when the coughing was bad, the better blanket, the little cloth pouch of dried pine needles he liked to crush in his fist because he said it made him feel like he was outside. Leora packed too. Not clothing for herself. Terms. Rights for Cassian under Black Hollow law. Medical obligation regardless of conception. Inheritance structure. Consent. Household access. Travel rights. Protection from the council. Protection from the house. Protection from whatever Ronan's death would unleash once his grip finally left the mountain. Pain into structure, fear into ink. No wasted suffering. By dusk, the lower quarter had begun to hum. News travelled badly in packs. It moved hungry, crooked and fast. Women at the well spoke in lowered voices that sharpened when she passed. Young males lingered too long outside the lane. Doors that usually closed remained cracked open. Leora felt the attention settle over her life like smoke. The Alpha's summons had not stayed private for even half a day. Of course it had not. Nothing involving power ever did. It was fully dark when the knock came at her door again. This one was softer, more deliberate, the kind of knock made by someone who wanted to seem welcome while arriving as threat. Leora knew the voice before the woman spoke. "Leora, are you awake?" Tavia Merrow stood on the porch wrapped in pale fur, snow caught in her dark hair, two companions behind her like a chorus for her vanity. She smiled the way high-born females smiled when they wanted the appearance of civility without giving up the pleasure of cruelty. "I heard your son is leaving for the capital," she said. "You heard quickly." In Black Hollow, anything involving the Alpha becomes everyone's concern. That was true enough. Tavia took one small step closer. "I came to offer sympathy. Sudden change can be frightening." Leora kept one hand on the door. "Is that why you came?" Tavia's smile thinned, though it did not break. "I also thought it kind to caution you against misunderstanding generosity. The Alpha is a male of duty. His concern for your son is admirable. That does not mean you should mistake his mercy for elevation." There it was, not loud, not crude, sharper than that. Leora looked at her in silence. Tavia mistook it for weakness. "He has always carried a burden toward unfortunate wolves," she continued. "It would be unfortunate if gratitude made you ambitious." Leora let the words land. Then she opened the door wider, so the firelight reached her face and the warm scent of medicine and child and labor rolled out between them. "My son is sick," she said. "You came to my door at night to warn me not to dream above my station. You should go home before your own reflection shames you." Tavia's eyes flashed. One of her companions looked away first. "You forget who you are." "No," Leora said softly. "I remember too well. That is why I know who you are." A sharp breath sounded behind Tavia. The younger woman's chin lifted. "Females like you survive through endurance," she said. "Not rank. Do not confuse the two." Leora's mouth almost moved. "Then pray the Alpha remembers the same distinction, because if he does not, this mountain is going to become very uncomfortable for women who mistake proximity to power for ownership of it." Then she shut the door, not dramatically, cleanly. The wood closed between them with satisfying finality. Inside, her pulse was racing. Her hand trembled once and then stilled. She went to Cassian, adjusted his blanket, fed the fire, and began packing with more precision than before. Outside, footsteps retreated through snow. Inside, the cottage held. That night, the emotional weight sat close enough to become dangerous. Cassian slept under fever medicine. Mara finally went home to rest. The room quieted until even the crackle of the fire felt too loud. Leora sat alone at the table with the Alpha's bargain spread before her like a battlefield map. If she refused, Cassian still lived. Ronan had promised that. But after the capital, after treatment, after months under physicians and strangers and costly medicine, how long would Alpha protection remain once she had refused the contract that gave it shape? How many wolves in Black Hollow would remember the boy once the urgency passed and the dying Alpha's attention moved elsewhere? If she accepted, she entered the center of a war already gathering itself. The council, the house, the females, the bond, the heir, the Alpha's death, all of it waiting inside walls built to crush weaker creatures into obedience. And beneath every practical thought lay the most dangerous truth of all. Mate. Leora pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and breathed once into the dark. Shock, pain, decision, no backward looping, no wasted suffering. She rose, pulled on her cloak, and stepped outside. Snow had softened the whole lower quarter into silence. Roofs gleamed white. Smoke drifted low. The Alpha house loomed above the ridge, lit at a few high windows like the watchful eye of something ancient that had finally decided to look down. Leora stood in the yard until the cold cut through her enough to sharpen thought into certainty. Tomorrow, Cassian would leave. That part was settled. The rest would be hers. If she chose Ronan's bargain, it would not be from fear. It would not be from gratitude. It would not be from the weak, humiliating relief of being selected by power. It would be with terms. If she entered the Alpha house, she would not enter as a stray lifted from the snow. She would enter with law, with witnesses, with protections that would outlive his body if his promise could not. That decision did not soothe anything. It transformed it. When she went back into the cottage, she took out the old ledger she used to track herb sales and winter stores, turned to a blank page, and began to write. Guardianship clauses, household funds, consent, inheritance, travel rights, formal corrections in open chamber, council penalties, medical obligation. She wrote until her hand cramped. By dawn she had not slept at all. Cassian stirred when first light touched the window. She helped him sit and wrapped him in blankets while she buttoned his coat. "Is it time to go?" he murmured. "Tonight." He nodded weakly, trusting her because children had to trust someone, even when the world no longer deserved it. A knock sounded at the door, too early for Mara, too measured for a neighbor. Leora opened it. Ronan stood on the porch alone. Snow silvered the shoulders of his black coat. The dawn light carved the scar along his jaw pale against winter skin. He looked as he always did. Dangerous, controlled, impossible to mistake for any other male alive. Yet the illness rode closer to the surface now. A thin, bitter note under cedar and command that her senses could no longer ignore. His gold eyes moved past her once, finding Cassian by the fire. Then they returned to her. The bond hit harder this time. No violent jolt, something worse. A deep inward pull that tightened around breath and blood alike. Leora felt her wolf rise in aching answer. Ronan's jaw shifted once, the only outward sign that he felt it too. He had come without witness, without beta, without rank to shield the private shape of what was happening between them. "May I enter?" he asked. The question should have sounded courteous. From a male like Ronan, it sounded like pressure made elegant. Leora stood in the doorway long enough for the moment to matter. Then she stepped aside. He entered, and the cottage changed around him. Power did that. So did wealth, illness, danger, and a bond both of them were trying not to name aloud again. His gaze found the open ledger on the table. When he looked back up, something dark and intent had sharpened in his face. "If you want my answer," she said, "you will hear my conditions first." For the first time since dawn at the Alpha house, something almost like satisfaction touched the corner of his mouth. "Good," he said. His voice dropped lower, rougher, more dangerous for the approval in it. "Tell me how you intend to survive." Chapter 2. Terms. Ronan did not sit. That told Leora more than any expression could have. A male like him did not remain standing in another's home unless he intended to control the space without appearing to take it. His presence filled the cottage anyway, pressing against the walls, settling into the air, turning something small and familiar into something sharper simply by existing inside it. Cassian watched him from the bed with wide, quiet eyes. Ronan looked at the boy once, long enough to register him, then turned his full attention back to Leora. The shift was deliberate. It said everything it needed to without words. "The child matters. The decision belongs to you." Leora moved to the table and placed her hand over the open ledger, steadying herself through contact with something she had built rather than something being forced on her. "You came early," she said. "You did not sleep. It was not a question." "No." His gaze flicked briefly to the ink stains on her fingers, the filled pages, the tightness in her shoulders, then back to her face. "Good," he said quietly. "I prefer decisions made awake." Something in her almost laughed. Of course he did. "Then listen carefully," she said, "because I will not repeat myself." The temperature in the room shifted. Cassian watched them both, silent, sensing something larger than he could yet understand moving through the space between them. Ronan inclined his head once. "Go on." Leora did not pace. She did not soften her tone. She did not dress her words in politeness that would make them easier to ignore. "If I agree to your proposal, my son remains under your protection whether I conceive or not. That protection does not weaken after your death. It does not transfer to council approval. It does not depend on whether your pack approves of me." Ronan did not interrupt. "Good. You will establish legal guardianship over him under Black Hollow law with named witnesses. If anything happens to me, he is not returned to the lower quarter as an afterthought. He remains under Alpha protection or is transferred to the capital with funding secured before your death." A flicker of something moved through his eyes. "Not resistance, calculation, continue. My position in your house is not decorative. I will have independent access to funds, the right to move within the territory without escort if I choose, and the right to travel to the capital when necessary. I will not ask permission to ensure my son's survival." "Granted," Ronan said without hesitation. The speed of it almost threw her. Almost. Leora did not slow. "If I bear your child, that child is recognized as heir before birth. There will be no council delay, no dispute, no testing of legitimacy used to weaken my standing or the child's claim." His voice dropped slightly. "That will be written into law." "Good." Silence stretched for a breath. Then she reached the point that mattered most. "And you will not touch me without my consent." The room went completely still. Even the fire seemed to quiet. Cassian shifted under the blankets, sensing something in the air had sharpened. Ronan did not move, but something inside him did. She felt it through the bond. A surge. Not anger, not rejection. Something darker. Something that pressed outward and then locked back under control so tightly it became dangerous. His gaze held hers. "Explain what you think I am." His voice was low, not loud, not threatening in the obvious way lesser males threatened. Controlled. That made it worse. Leora did not look away. "I think you are a male who has never needed to ask, and I think that kind of male forgets where asking should begin." The truth landed cleanly between them. Ronan's jaw tightened. For a second, something raw moved through him. Not offense, recognition. Then he stepped closer, not enough to touch, enough to shift the air. "Look at me," he said. She already was. "Whatever this becomes," he continued, "it will not be built on force." The words came without hesitation. That mattered more than anything softer would have. "Swear it before witnesses. I will—" No pause. No argument. No attempt to negotiate the condition down into something easier. That was the first moment she believed he meant it. And belief, here, was dangerous. Leora continued before it could root. "I will also have the right to demand correction in open chamber if I am undermined, insulted, or threatened by your council or your house." A faint shift touched the corner of his mouth. "You expect that to happen?" "I expect your house to test me," she said, "and I expect you to be watching something else when it does." That almost earned a reaction. Almost. Instead, he said, "It will be written." She nodded once, then closed the ledger. The sound landed like a seal. "That is my answer," she said. "Those are my terms." Silence filled the cottage. Not empty, full. Ronan stood there, looking at her like he was seeing something he had not anticipated finding inside this arrangement. Not resistance, not submission, structure. He reached for the ledger. She did not hand it to him immediately. Another small shift. Another boundary. He waited. Then she passed it over. He read quickly, not skimming, not lazily, but with the precise attention of a male who knew a badly worded law could become a weapon later. His eyes moved across each clause, each line, each demand. Once or twice something sharpened in his expression. Once, very briefly, something like approval. When he finished, he closed the book and set it back on the table. "You intend to survive me," he said. "Yes." The word did not shake. Something in him settled. "Good," he said. This time the word carried weight, decision, agreement, something darker. "I accept your terms." The air changed again, not softer, more dangerous, because now the bargain was no longer potential. It was real. Cassian stirred. "Ma?" Leora turned immediately, the shift from negotiation to mother so sharp it almost split her in two. "I'm here." The boy looked between them. "Is he the one sending me away?" Ronan answered before she could soften it. "I am sending you somewhere you will not die." Cassian studied him. Children recognize truth faster than adults. After a moment he nodded once. "Then I'll go," he said. Leora closed her eyes briefly. Pain, sharp, clean, then gone, converted decision. She turned back to Ronan. "When do you tell the council?" "Tonight." "Too fast." "Of course it was." "They will resist," she said. "Yes." "You will push." "Yes." "And when they turn on me?" His gaze darkened slightly. "They won't." Leora held his eyes. "They will." A pause. Then quieter, "Yes." There it was. Truth without illusion. "Good. I will not stand behind you," she said. "If I enter that chamber, I stand beside you, or I do not enter at all." Ronan did not hesitate. "Beside me." The words dropped into place. A line drawn, a position declared, a war invited. Leora nodded once, then moved, not toward him, but toward Cassian. She adjusted the blanket, pressed her lips briefly to his hair, then stood again. "When does the wagon leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow night." "And you will take him yourself?" Ronan's gaze shifted to the boy again. Something unreadable passed through his expression. Yes, that mattered, more than anything else he had said so far, because it meant Cassian was not being handed off. He was being carried under Alpha authority directly, which made the protection visible. Leora straightened. "Then we are finished here." Ronan did not move. The bond stirred again, not violent, not sharp, but deeper, something that recognized the shift that had just occurred. Agreement, alignment, danger. "You should rest," he said. "I won't." A faint exhale, not frustration, understanding. "Then prepare, because by nightfall Black Hollow will know your name." Leora met his gaze. "They already do. They just do not understand why yet." Something in his expression changed at that. Not softened, but focused. Then he turned and walked to the door. He paused once, his hand on the wood, and without looking back said, "You will not be alone in that chamber." Leora watched him. "I do not intend to be." He left. The door closed. The cottage settled. Silence returned. But it was no longer the same silence. Leora stood in the center of the room and felt it fully for the first time. Shock had already passed. Pain had already cut through. What remained now was something colder. Control. She moved to the table, opened the ledger again, and added one final line beneath her terms. Witnesses required. Counsel, beta, and full chamber record. No hidden agreements. No quiet rewriting later. Everything would be seen. Everything would be remembered. Across the room, Cassian watched her with tired eyes. "You're not afraid," he said. Leora looked at him, then at the fire, then back at her son. "Yes," she said, "but I'm done letting it decide for me." Cassian nodded slowly, as if that answer made sense, as if he understood more than he should. Outside, the snow thickened. Above them, the Alpha house waited. and by nightfall the mountain would learn exactly what kind of mistake it had made. Chapter 3. The Council Chamber. The climb to the upper ridge felt longer with the whole mountain watching. Snow whispered under Leora's boots as she followed Ronan toward the Alpha house at dusk. Torches burned along the stone path, their light caught in the iron cages and thrown across the frozen ground in long amber bands. Wolves stood aside as they passed. Some lowered their heads at once. Others hesitated just long enough to be noticed. Every pause was its own confession. Every glance was calculation. Leora kept her spine straight and her breathing even. She had changed into her cleanest dark dress, mended twice at the cuffs and plain enough to offend any female born to the upper ridge. Good. Let it offend them. She had not climbed into the heart of Black Hollow to soothe anyone's vanity. Ronan walked beside her in black, broad-shouldered and silent, the bond a low, dangerous current between them. It did not comfort. It tightened. It reminded. Each time it stirred, she felt the pull beneath her ribs and answered it with discipline. Not now. Not like this. Not in front of a room full of wolves waiting for weakness. The Alpha house rose through the dusk like judgment carved into wood and stone. Its upper windows glowed gold against the gathering dark. At the entrance, Selwyn waited without speaking, his expression unreadable, his posture already telling her how bad the chamber would be. Bad then. Expected. The council room doors opened before Ronan touched them. Heat rolled out first, followed by old cedar, ink, candle wax, and the dense scent of wolves who had gathered too early and sharpened themselves while waiting. The chamber itself curved wide beneath a vaulted ceiling of black beams. Torches burned in brackets along the walls. A crescent table of dark, polished wood dominated the center, its surface gleaming beneath the light. At the far wall, beneath the carved black hollow crest, stood the Alpha chair, high-backed, severe, built to make every lesser wolf remember where power sat. 7 council seats were filled. Elder Bram sat nearest the center, heavy-browed and broad through the shoulders despite his age, his grey beard cut short, and his face arranged into grave irritation. Beside him sat Merrow, already too tense, his dislike showing in the line of his mouth. The others formed a colder wall: lawkeeper, treasurer, patrol elder, grainmaster, ritual witness. Behind them stood a handful of chosen observers, including 3 high-born females who had clearly decided their presence counted as politics rather than desperation. Tavia was among them. Of course she was. Her gaze landed on Leora the instant they entered. The look was smooth enough for public use, and poisonous enough for private understanding. It said what the chamber had already decided to think before she crossed the threshold: lower quarter, widow, mistake. Leora met the look once and gave it nothing. Ronan did not slow. That was the first cut. He led her into the room without hesitation, straight past the lower witness seats and the side chairs reserved for petitioners, until they reached the crescent table itself. Then he pulled back the chair beside his own and waited. Beside, not behind, not at the wall, not on some humiliating outer edge dressed up as propriety. Beside. The room changed. No one spoke, but the shift hit like something dropped into still water. Merrow's face tightened. One of the observing females inhaled too sharply. Even Bram's expression altered by a fraction, surprise hidden too late to be fully dignified. Leora sat. The chair felt too large, the chamber too bright, every eye too fixed, but none of that mattered as much as what Ronan had just done. He had placed her where the room would have to look at her directly. Good, let them. Ronan remained standing for a moment after she sat. That too was deliberate. The entire room waited on him. When he finally took his own chair, the chamber seemed to exhale and brace at once. Selwyn moved to the wall behind Ronan's right shoulder. Not in ceremonial service, in readiness, Ronan folded one hand over the table and said, "We are not here for discussion. We are here for witness." The words landed hard. Mero opened his mouth anyway. "Alpha!" "No, just that." Ronan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Dominance traveled farther when it had nothing to prove. Mero's protest died where it had begun, and the chamber remembered itself. Moved over the table, pinning each elder in turn. "I am dying." No one breathed. The lawkeeper's pen paused above the ledger. One of the females at the wall went pale. Tavia's fingers tightened on the back of the chair in front of her. Ronan did not soften the blow by giving them space to absorb it. "The blood physicians have confirmed terminal wolf failure. I have months, not years. Black Hollow will not be left to rot while lesser wolves pretend denial counts as strategy." Silence held for one stretched second. Then Bram said carefully, "Alpha, surely this matter should have been brought to private counsel before." "No." Again, simple. Again, lethal. Ronan leaned back in his chair, not relaxed, but controlled enough to make the room feel more dangerous for it. "You are not here to advise me on death. You are here to witness what follows it." His gaze shifted briefly toward Leora before returning to the table. "I intend to take a lawful mate and secure succession. The female seated beside me has accepted my terms. Her conditions will be entered into law." The chamber broke. Not loudly. That would have been less serious. Instead, it fractured in the cold, ugly ways upper wolves preferred. Sharp glances, breath caught in the throat, outrage strangled into manners. Tavia's composure slipped first. Mero's control followed. Bram held, but only barely. Mero stared directly at Leora. "The widow from the lower quarter?" Ronan turned his head very slowly. That was enough to make Mero understand he had already misstepped, but not enough to save him from where the mistake would lead. "Yes," Ronan said. "The widow from the lower quarter. The female your chamber never noticed while her child sickened beneath your ridge." Mero flushed darkly. "My concern is not the child, it is the line." Leora spoke before Ronan could. "That is obvious." Every eye swung to her. Good. The room had expected her to endure witness. It had not yet accepted that she might answer. Mero's face hardened. "You speak boldly for someone not yet entered into this house." Leora met his stare with exhausting calm. "You speak comfortably for a male who has never had to drag a fevered child through winter, while stronger wolves debate which bloodlines deserve pity." That landed harder than if she had shouted. Bram's brows drew together. Mero looked momentarily caught between outrage and the unpleasant realization that he had just been answered in front of witnesses by the woman he had hoped to reduce. Ronan did not interrupt. That mattered too. Instead, he said, "The conditions." The lawkeeper swallowed once and reached for the copy Selwyn set before him. His voice was less steady than he would have preferred when he began to read. "Guardianship for Cassian Voss under Alpha law, continued medical support regardless of conception, independent household funds, open chamber correction rights, protected travel, formal heir recognition before birth, enforceable bodily consent, witnessed record, punishment for interference from council or house." Each clause fell into the room like a stone dropped into ice. By the fourth, the observing females had gone very still. By the sixth, Bram's expression had shifted from offense to reluctant concentration. By the eighth, Mero was no longer looking at Leora as if she were accidental. He was looking at her as if she had become a structural problem. Good. When the lawkeeper finished, silence spread again. Then Mero, because males like him mistook repetition for power when pressure closed around them, said, "This is absurd. Black Hollow succession cannot be handed to a lower quarter widow with a sick bastard child simply because the Alpha is desperate." The word hit. There. Clean. Ugly. Public. Leora felt it strike through her body, and reach for the place inside her that had already spent too many years learning silence as survival. Cassian. The child on the bed. The child in the wagon tomorrow. The child whose breathing she counted at night, while wolves like this spoke of blood and line as if lives existed to flatter their comfort. The humiliation peak landed, not loud, not messy, perfectly placed. The room felt it too. That was the mistake. Not that Mero insulted her, that he insulted the child in front of the chamber and expected the room to hold. Ronan moved before the last syllable fully died. One heartbeat he was seated. The next, Mero was half out of his chair, with Ronan's hand at his throat, and the whole crescent table shoved sideways under the force of the movement. Pens rolled. One candle toppled and guttered against the wood. Someone gasped. Tavia made a strangled noise and then stopped making any at all. Ronan dragged Mero across the table until the elder's knees cracked against stone. "No one," Ronan said in a voice so low it sounded more dangerous than a snarl, "speaks of her son that way, and keeps comfort in my house." The room froze. Mero clawed at Ronan's wrist, useless and humiliated and suddenly very aware that every witness in the chamber could smell his fear. Bram half rose, then thought better of it. Selwyn did not move. Ronan leaned closer, gold eyes blazing now with the thing beneath discipline that all packs feared and all territories built around when they chose their strongest males. "Hear law while you still have enough breath to understand it. From this moment, Cassian Voss stands under Alpha protection. Any insult against him is insult against my authority. Any threat against him is threat against Black Hollow itself." The words rang through the chamber like iron. The lawkeeper, hands shaking, scratched the addendum into the ledger at once. Ronan let Mero go. The elder collapsed back into his chair, breath ragged, face ruined by public fear. There, power reversal, clean, irreversible. Black Hollow would remember where the line had moved tonight, and Mero would never again be able to pretend he had not been dragged to his knees for the insult. Ronan returned to his chair as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Only one detail betrayed what the movement had cost him. As he sat, his hand pressed once, briefly, almost invisibly, against the table edge, and the faint bitter scent of fresh blood touched the air. Leora noticed. So did Selwyn. No one else did. Bram cleared his throat with visible effort. "The conditions are severe." Leora looked at him. "The circumstances are severe." A beat passed. Then Bram leaned back slowly, one thick hand flattening over the table, as if steadying not himself, but the room's idea of itself. "You assume the house will turn on you." Leora's voice stayed calm. "I assume houses built by powerful males often expect women to be grateful for the exact amount of damage they are allowed to survive." A flicker moved through the chamber. Not approval, recognition. It came and went too quickly for most of them to admit to themselves, but it was there. Mero, still struggling to recover what dignity he could from the wreckage, spat, "Pack law has never recognized lower quarter blood as fit to anchor succession." Ronan's expression emptied. That was worse than anger. "Pack law recognizes what I seal while I still draw breath," he said, "and if you intend to lecture me on blood, let us discuss mine." The room changed. Again. Ronan looked to the lawkeeper. "Read the physician's certification." The male obeyed at once, fumbling for the sealed parchment Selwyn had already placed before him. He broke the wax and read with increasing strain. "By seal of the Northern Blood Physicians, it is certified that Alpha Ronan Thorne suffers terminal wolf failure of hereditary origin, advanced beyond ritual or medicinal reversal, with expected remaining life not exceeding 6 months, barring miraculous intervention. Hereditary origin." The words hit the chamber harder than the announcement of death itself, because death was one thing, rot in the line was another. Ronan let that truth spread through the room before he spoke again. Any wolf with enough nerve to lecture me on superior blood may begin by explaining why the line so many of you have spent years polishing with your daughters and nieces carries the disease that will bury me. Shock moved through the chamber like a blade. There it was, another reversal. Worse than the first because it cracked the foundation beneath every smug calculation the upper house had been making around him for years. Their worthy line was failing from inside. Their superiority had begun eating itself long before Leora entered the room. Bram's face had gone hard and old. Merrow looked sick. Leora sat very still and understood what Ronan had just done. He had cut his own line open in public to strip the room of its easiest weapon against her. That mattered, dangerously. Bram exhaled slowly. Even so, a hasty marriage under emotional pressure may destabilize the territory. Leora opened the ledger and slid it toward the center again. Then let law stabilize what emotion threatens. The lawkeeper looked to Ronan, received a nod, and read the clauses again, this time with the addition of Cassian's public protection sealed in. The chamber listened differently now. Not because they liked what they heard, but because after Merrow's humiliation and the physician's certification, they understood the old footing had already given way. When the reading ended, Bram looked at Leora with something approaching reluctant respect. These are not the demands of a frightened female. No, Leora said. They are the demands of one expected to live through what follows your Alpha's death. That landed with brutal accuracy. Merrow could not stop himself. You speak as though you already belong here. Leora turned to him. You speak as though your comfort decides where the future sits. Silence. Then Bram said almost to himself, This was not how I expected the mountain to change. No, Ronan answered. It rarely is. He rose. The whole room straightened with him. I will not debate this further. The contract will be sealed tonight. The female beside me enters this house under my name, under law, and under my protection. Any challenge to her standing after this hour will be taken as challenge to my authority directly. No one moved. No one spoke. That should have ended it. It did not. Merrow rose unsteadily, rage and humiliation making him reckless enough to choose a worse death than silence. Then I challenge her blood right. The chamber froze. Bram's eyes closed once, briefly, as if old age had finally grown tired in his bones. Selwyn's expression changed by almost nothing, which meant he was already calculating consequences. Leora felt the shift at once. Blood right challenge, ancient, rare, cruel, not always combat, sometimes worse, relics, moon rites, oath stones, old laws pacts pretended were sacred whenever they wanted prejudice to wear the dignity of tradition. Ronan's voice turned to ice. No. Merrow's face was still flushed from his near strangling, but he pressed forward anyway because men like him often mistook a wound for authority if enough wolves were watching. If she is to stand beside the Alpha, let the old law answer. Bram looked grim. Under formal right, the challenge can be called. Ronan's gaze did not leave Merrow, and denied. It can, Bram said carefully, but refusal will be heard as fear. There, the real trap, not law. Optics, rumor, weakness dressed as caution. If Ronan refused, they would obey publicly and undermine privately. If Leora declined, the chamber would never let her stand unmarked by it. The humiliation peak had already struck. The breakdown would not come here. It would not come at all if she had anything left to say about it. Shock had become pain. Pain had become control. Now control needed to become power. Before Ronan could speak again, Leora stood. The movement pulled every eye to her. What kind of blood right? She asked. Merrow's smile, when it came, was thin and mean. The Moonstone trial. A murmur ran through the chamber. Leora knew the name. So did the room. The Moonstone was older than Black Hollow's current law and crueler in what it revealed. It did not measure kindness or worth. It answered blood, dominance, buried lines, hidden fractures. Pack stories said it had exposed bastards, ruined heirs. and once split a mating pact cleanly in front of an entire winter assembly. Its danger was precisely that no one controlled what it chose to say. Ronan stood too fast. The scent of fresh blood sharpened briefly under cedar and command. No. This time the refusal shook the room. Mero saw something in it and smiled wider. Then perhaps the Alpha fears what it may reveal. Ronan looked like violence compressed into human shape. Leora understood then with sudden cold certainty that his objection was not only about protecting her from spectacle. He feared revelation. The bond. Her blood. Something older than either of them had yet named. And if he feared it, then the risk was real. That made the answer easier. Leora turned to him. For one suspended moment, the room disappeared. No council, no observers. Only the male in front of her, furious and contained and already too deep in this to hide it cleanly anymore. "You said you wanted the territory secured," she said quietly. "Then let them watch." His eyes burned. "You do not know what that stone may drag into the open, neither do they. That is the problem." The words hit between them, low and dangerous. Leora felt the bond tighten in answer, hot and unwilling, as if even it understood this was a hinge. "If I am to survive this mountain after you," she said, "I will not do it hidden behind your fear." That struck him. She saw it. He saw that she saw it. And because he was Ronan, because control was the first language he had ever mastered, he gave the room almost nothing except a silence sharp enough to cut through torch smoke. Then, without looking away from her, he said, "The trial will proceed." Mero exhaled in ugly satisfaction. Bram looked sick of the whole century. Selwyn moved to the relic alcove at the rear of the chamber, while the lawkeeper prepared the witness record, with hands that were no steadier than before. The room shifted around the decision. Some wolves leaned in, others leaned back as if distance might spare them if the old law turned ugly. Leora stepped out from behind the table and crossed toward the moon-carved circle set into the center of the floor. Each footstep sounded too loud, each breath felt measured. No collapse, not here, not for them. When she reached the circle, the chamber looked different from the center of it, farther, harsher. Wolves reduced to eyes and scent and anticipation. Ronan came to stand half a step behind her and to the side, close enough that she could feel the heat of him even without contact, close enough that the room would read his position and understand what it meant. If the trial shamed her, it would shame him too. "Good," Selwyn returned, carrying the relic wrapped in dark velvet. The cloth fell back. The moonstone did not look beautiful. It looked old, heavy. Raw silver white shot through with darker veins that seemed almost alive beneath the torchlight. It sat in the Beta's hands like something cut from winter itself and taught to remember blood. He placed it on the pedestal at the center of the circle. The lawkeeper, voice strained, recorded the challenge. Mero stated it for the chamber with formal wording. He clearly enjoyed too much. "I challenge the fitness of Leora Voss to stand as intended mate to Alpha Ronan Thorn and possible mother of Black Hollow's succession." Bram turned to Leora. "Do you answer?" She lifted her chin. "I do." A ceremonial blade was offered. She took it. The metal was colder than ice. For one fractional second, everything narrowed to the edge of the knife, the pulse in her wrist, and the unbearable awareness of Ronan behind her, watching, furious, unable now to stop what he had allowed. She cut her palm. Pain flashed bright and immediate. Blood welled dark across her skin. Then Leora placed her hand on the stone. The world went white. Chapter 4. What the moonstone chose to reveal. The light did not flash across the chamber. It entered her. That was the first impossible thing. It drove through the cut in Leora's palm, through blood and nerve and bone, and rushed upward with the clean violence of something ancient finding a locked door and deciding it had never accepted the lock in the first place. Her spine arched. A sound tore out of her before she could stop it, low and shocked, and far too raw for a room full of enemies. The moonstone burned white, not glowed, burned. The dark veins inside it came alive, silver turning liquid beneath the surface, then gold at the edges, as though the relic were dragging hidden blood into sight and forcing even the light to testify. The pedestal cracked down the center with a sharp report. Gasps broke through the chamber. One of the observing females cried out. Mero stumbled back against the table. The lawkeeper dropped his pen. Leora could not see any of them clearly. Images were striking too fast. Moonlight over black water, a pine ridge under snow, claws in white drifts, a woman running with a child held tight against her chest, a seal pressed into hot wax. A voice, female and furious, speaking words she could not fully hear and yet somehow understood in her bones. Then came the second impossible thing. Her wolf rose, not cautiously, not in the weak, half-muted way she had known all these years. It surged upward in full force, vast and female and furious, carrying a pressure so old and sharp it felt less like awakening and more like return. Power slammed out of her in a shockwave that bowed torch flames and sent a ripple through every wolf in the room. Several stepped back on instinct. Bram's chair scraped. Tavia caught herself on the arm of the observer's bench. Even Selwyn tightened, not in fear but in immediate recognition that the room had just changed shape. Ronan moved at last. His hand closed around Leora's wrist, not to tear her away from the stone, but to hold her steady against it, as if some brutal instinct in him already knew that breaking the contact too soon might fracture something neither of them would be able to mend. "Leora!" His voice reached her through the blaze. She could not answer. The stone was still speaking in blood and pressure and memory. A symbol burned through her mind. Crescent over fang, silver threaded with shadow. Not ordinary pack law, older, founding blood, ridge oath, female line. Her knees nearly gave. Ronan's other arm came around her waist and held her upright. The entire chamber narrowed to the iron force of his grip, the raw violence of the relic, and the unbearable certainty that whatever was happening had moved far beyond a challenge. Then the moonstone made its judgment visible. A line of pale fire shot up the center of the crystal. The silver brightened into something merciless and blinding. Above the pedestal, in the middle of the chamber, a sigil formed in cold lunar flame. Every wolf in the room saw it. The black hollow crest split down the center and reformed with a second bloodline threaded through it. Silver veined with darkness and edged in gold. Recognition. Union. Claim. The room froze under the meaning of it. Bram was the first to find his voice, and even he sounded older for it. Impossible. Mero stared with his mouth open. Tavia had gone pale enough to look sick. The lawkeeper made a sign against ill fortune under the table before he remembered where he was. Because they all knew what the moonstone did. It did not invent. It revealed. And what it had just revealed was catastrophic. Leora was not merely acceptable. She carried blood strong enough to answer the founding relic as equal. The light dropped out of the room all at once. The sigil vanished. The moonstone dimmed from white to pale silver, and then blackened at the center with a hiss, as though even the stone had paid for what it had declared. Leora's hand slipped from the crystal. The cut across her palm throbbed hot and sharp. Her knees buckled. Ronan caught her completely this time, one arm around her waist, one hand locked around her bloodied wrist. His scent was all storm now, control under assault, command held together by force, and something more dangerous boiling beneath it, because a male like Ronan Thorne was built to master chaos, not receive it. And yet he was receiving it. Leora felt the moment it truly hit him. Not the bond, not the bloodline, the loss of control. He had brought her here to secure succession, dominate the chamber, force order out of old law and public witness. He had calculated resistance, cruelty, and the cost of the challenge. He had not calculated this. He had not calculated a hidden bloodline old enough to answer the moonstone. He had not calculated the bond exploding fully open in front of his entire council, because that was the third impossible thing. The scent in the room changed. Not gradually, not subtly. Every wolf present smelled it at once. Mate, no longer distant, no longer deniable. not the faint half-recognition of a badly timed bond trying to wake under grief and exhaustion. This was full and undeniable, cut loose by blood, relic, and public witness. The room flooded with it: cedar, winter iron, female power, alpha dominance, and the savage pull of recognition between them. A shocked sound escaped one of the observers. Selwyn went very still in the way only disciplined wolves did when alarm sharpened into usefulness. Bram closed his eyes once, like an old male who had just watched the mountain tilt. Merrow looked from Leora to Ronan with dawning horror and understood the scale of his mistake. He had not merely challenged a widow from the lower quarter, he had forced the founding relic to recognize the Alpha's mate as a buried bloodline returned to standing. Every insult he had thrown at her had just become stupidity written in law. Ronan's hold tightened once around Leora's waist. Too tight, instinct, possession. His wolf answering what the chamber had just smelled. Mine. The word did not come from his mouth. It came through the bond, through the pressure in the room, through the feral line of ownership his body was trying and failing to hide from her. Leora went cold. He felt the reaction immediately. His grip shifted, not looser but more controlled. He had caught himself. "Stand," he said quietly. The command was for her. The restraint inside it was for himself. Leora found her feet because falling now would turn revelation into spectacle. Ronan let her go only when he was sure she could remain upright. The loss of his hold should have been relief. Instead it left behind an ache she refused to examine. Bram rose slowly. "The chamber has witnessed," he said, voice roughened by the effort of remaining neutral inside a room that had just shattered around him. No one interrupted. "The relic has recognized blood and bond. The challenge fails." Merrow opened his mouth. Selwyn spoke before he could. "If you force one more sound through that throat tonight," the beta said, in a voice polished to ice, "I will help the Alpha finish what he started." Merrow shut his mouth. Wisely. The lawkeeper bent over his ledger with shaking fingers. "Challenge failed by relic recognition," he muttered as he wrote. "Bond witnessed. Intended mate affirmed under founding law." Each line sealed another exit. Leora stood inside the moon-carved circle with blood drying on her palm and the entire chamber looking at her differently now. The contempt had not vanished. Wolves like these did not become noble in a single evening, but fear had entered it. So had calculation. They were no longer seeing a lower quarter widow who had been dragged too high by the Alpha's desperation. They were seeing a female the founding relic had answered. That changed everything. Ronan understood before any of them how much it changed. She saw it in his face when he turned back toward the chamber. The control was returning. That made him more dangerous, not less. Now he was no longer reacting. He was already converting catastrophe into structure. "Seal the record," he said. The lawkeeper jolted. "At once, Alpha, add the following. Leora Voss is recognized as intended mate under founding law, with blood right affirmed by Moonstone witness. Any challenge to her standing after this hour constitutes challenge to my authority and to relic judgment." The room took that like a blow. "Further," Ronan continued, "all discussion of her lineage outside this chamber is forbidden until I determine what remains to be uncovered. There, containment. Not because he wished to bury her, because he understood too quickly how many wolves would move if rumor outran knowledge." Bram nodded grimly. So recorded. Merrow, still ragged from public fear and private humiliation, found enough voice for bitterness. "You cannot bury what the room already smells." Ronan turned his head. That was enough. "No," he said, "but I can decide who survives saying it carelessly." Silence closed over the chamber again. Leora's palm burned. Her whole body still felt too full of light strain and restless new power. She should have been exhausted. Instead, she felt sharpened. Under her skin, something once muted had become impossible to ignore. Her wolf was awake now, not soothed, awake. And beneath the pain, one understanding was beginning to root. She had not spent all these years weak. She had spent them buried. Ronan looked at her then, not as alpha to intended mate, as male to female, as wolf to wolf, as someone who had just watched old law strip away every simplification he had built around this arrangement. He stepped closer. The room was still full of witnesses. That was what made what he did next even more dangerous. He took her injured hand, slowly, publicly, deliberately. The chamber held its breath. Ronan lifted her bloodied palm and pressed it against the center of his chest, directly over his heart. The gesture was older than any court custom. Not claim, not caress, recognition, a battlefield vow. The kind used when rank and blood had both already spoken and one final truth needed witness in flesh. The scent in the room deepened instantly. Bond, authority, public alignment. Leora's breath shortened. His heartbeat struck hard beneath her palm, strong, then wrong, then strong again. There it was, the illness, real, hidden under force and discipline and sheer refusal. He was dying. He was standing in front of his council with death under his ribs and binding her publicly to the center of his failing rule anyway. She looked up at him. His face had gone to stone again, but his eyes were not stone. They were worse. Hungry in a way that had nothing to do with lust and everything to do with the brutal knowledge that fate had delivered him something priceless at the exact moment time had become his enemy. He released her hand and turned away from the circle before anyone could fully read what had passed across his face. "The witnessing is concluded," he said. "The contract will be completed before dawn. Selwyn, escort the chamber out." That should have ended the night. It did not. Bram remained standing. "There is still the matter of lineage." Ronan's face hardened. "There is the matter of my patience." "There is the matter," Bram said, unfazed in the way only old wolves could afford to be, of whether Black Hollow's intended mate is tied to blood beyond our records. If she is, then you may already have enemies moving before sunrise. The truth of it dropped heavily into the room. Leora felt it at once. If her bloodline was old enough to wake the relic like that, then someone once had reason to hide it. Blood that old did not stay buried without motive, nor without enemies. Ronan knew it too. That was why he did not dismiss Bram. Selwyn stepped forward. "I'll lock the chamber records and place double guards on the relic vault." "Do it," Ronan said. "No one touches the moonstone again without me present." Merrow gave a bitter laugh he should have kept behind his teeth. "You speak as though your presence still controls this." Ronan turned. The chamber chilled. "You are alive tonight because I have larger problems than your corpse," he said. "Do not become a smaller one." Merrow dropped his gaze. At last, Selwyn began clearing the room with the clean efficiency of a male already thinking 3 moves ahead. The lawkeeper gathered his ledgers. The observers fled with as much dignity as panic allowed. Tavia left more slowly, but she left. Bram lingered only long enough to look at Leora with something old and sober in his face. "You did not break," he said. "No," she answered. Then he too was gone. Cracked stone, the ruined pedestal and the blackened moonstone remained, and Ronan, and her. The change in the room was immediate. Without witnesses it became more dangerous, not less. Public control had somewhere to drain now. Whatever he had caged through the trial and its aftermath no longer had a chamber full of eyes forcing it into shape. Leora stayed where she was. Ronan stood at the edge of the circle with his back half turned and one hand braced on the table. At first she thought the posture meant thought. Then she smelled blood. Not hers, his. She crossed the distance before deciding to, "Ronan." He went still. The use of his name did something to the air. Slowly he turned. A thin line of red marked the corner of his mouth. There it was, the cost of everything he had just forced his body to contain. "You should not be standing," she said quietly. One corner of his mouth almost moved. "And yet, you are bleeding." He wiped the blood away with his thumb, careless and precise at once. "I've endured worse. I believe that The answer landed between them with more force than it should have. For a beat, neither moved. Then Ronan spoke, voice lower now. The chamber smelled the bond. Yes, the relic recognized your blood. Yes. His eyes held hers with lethal steadiness. And I cannot decide which is more dangerous. Leora studied him. This close, the illness was clearer now. Iron, bitter root. Wolf's sickness held together by fury and will. She could also smell something else beneath it, hot and dark and tightening with every breath. Need. Not simple desire. Something meaner, more desperate, more male. The knowledge that time was short and what fate had placed before him had already become impossible to treat like strategy alone. You fear the one you cannot command, she said. He did not deny it. That was answer enough. The room quieted around them until even the torches seemed to burn more softly. Ronan took one slow step closer. This close, his heat reached her before thought did. So did the bond. It tightened until the silence between them felt almost physical. You should hate me for bringing you here, he said. Leora thought of the chamber, the trial, the humiliation, the revelation, the bond being torn open in public. She thought of Cassian leaving tomorrow under his protection. She thought of the line of his father and the house built around it, still hiding more than it admitted. Hate would be easier, she said. His eyes darkened. That was the wrong answer for safety. The bond surged, hot, immediate, violent enough to shorten her breath. Ronan felt it too. She saw it in the cut of his jaw, the hard flare of his nostrils, the flex of his hands before sheer discipline locked them still at his sides. Whatever happened next would matter too much. Leora stepped back first. Not from fear, from decision. The movement hit him like a concealed blade. She saw it. The first clean edge of controlled rejection entered the bond there, small, precise, enough. He went completely still. The room shrank around the distance she had created. Leora looked once at the blood drying in her palm, then back at his face. You wanted terms. Now you have more than terms. You have consequences. His expression sharpened. She continued before the bond could soften her into something foolish. My son is gone into the snow tomorrow because this mountain failed him until you needed me. Your council knows enough now to fear me, and not enough to understand why. And you, her voice stayed quiet, which made it strike harder, are dying fast enough to bleed through your control in front of me. He took that without flinching. That should not have impressed her. It did. Leora drew in one slow breath and made the shift that would define everything after this. Pain into action, shock into structure, distance into power. I will sign the contract before dawn, she said. I will stand in your house. I will uncover what blood woke in that stone. But until I choose otherwise, you do not touch me outside what the law requires. There. Not a dramatic refusal. Worse, a measured boundary delivered after the bond had already been publicly recognized, and his wolf had begun to claim what it could not yet possess. It struck exactly where she intended. She saw the impact in the flash of something raw across his face before it vanished. His wolf did not vanish with it. She felt the male animal answer the boundary with sudden furious focus, as if denial itself had sharpened her importance. Good. Let it. He had brought power to her doorstep first. Now he could learn what it meant when she built her own. Ronan's voice, when it came, was dangerously soft. You are setting law inside a bond that has already begun. I am setting survival inside a situation you no longer control. That landed perfectly. For one tense breath, he looked almost capable of saying something reckless. Instead, he gave her the most revealing honesty she had heard from him yet. You are making this harder. Leora held his gaze. You mistook me for something that would make it easy. The silence after that was thick enough to brood. Then Ronan did the one thing that proved he understood the gravity of what had changed. He bowed his head, not deeply, not ceremonially, just enough to acknowledge the boundary without surrendering his nature. Very well, he said. On your terms. Outside, wind struck the chamber walls. Somewhere high over the mountain, a wolf called once into the dark. Leora looked at the cracked pedestal, the blackened moonstone, the old room that had witnessed her breaking and remaking in a single night. She had entered this chamber as a widow trying to save her son. She was leaving it as a blood-marked intended mate with a publicly witnessed bond, a buried female line waking in her veins, and a dying Alpha who had just learned he could not command the pace at which she would come to him. That was power. Not complete, not safe, enough to matter. When she turned toward the doors, Ronan did not stop her. He only said into the dark space between them, "Selwyn will place guards outside your rooms tonight." She paused. My rooms? The Eastern Suite, not the guest wing, not some temporary chamber hidden at the edge of the house, until dawn could make things look more respectable. The Eastern Suite, the intended mate's wing, a declaration, another war opening. Leora glanced back over her shoulder. His face was in shadow now, his control restored to visible form, though the blood had returned in a thin dark line at the corner of his mouth. He looked exactly like what he was, a male fate had cornered, who still intended to bite through whatever held him. "Then tell your house to prepare itself," she said. His gaze fixed on her. "For what?" Leora opened the chamber doors. Cold air spilled in. "For me." She walked out without waiting for answer. Behind her, in the chamber she had just remade, Alpha Ronan Thorn stood beside the ruined moonstone and understood at last that fate had not delivered him a solution. It had delivered him a female who would either become the making of Black Hollow or the one force capable of surviving him. Chapter 5. The Eastern Suite. The corridor to the eastern wing was warmer than the council chamber and somehow less forgiving. Heat moved through hidden grates beneath the stone. Lanterns burned low in smoked glass, and the servants she passed lowered their eyes too quickly. The guards did not lower theirs at all. They watched her with the sharpened caution reserved for wolves who had become dangerous between one breath and the next. Leora felt every glance and let none of them alter her pace. Selwyn walked beside her in silence until they reached a pair of carved oak doors marked with a crescent worked into dark wood. Two attendants waited there. One was older, plain-faced, composed, with practical hands and a healer's quiet. The other was younger, lovely in the polished way upper house females often preferred, and too stiff to hide her unease well. Selwyn inclined his head toward the elder. "This is Moraine. She managed the eastern wing under the late Alpha female." Moraine bowed. "My lady." The title landed heavily. Leora did not flinch. "We will see." The younger attendant bowed next. "Ilsa?" Leora looked at them both. "If you serve in my rooms, you will do it honestly or not at all," Moraine answered first. "Understood." Ilsa nodded too quickly. Selwyn opened the doors and stood aside. The eastern suite was larger than Leora's entire cottage below the ridge. A fire burned in a carved hearth. Tall windows overlooked the dark pine slopes. A blackwood bed stood beneath winter-grey drapery. There were shelves, a writing desk, a bathing room, and a side chamber that could have housed two lower quarter families through the cold months. The luxury was not soft. It was overwhelming in the way power often was when it had never expected to make room for you. Leora crossed to the window and looked down toward the lower quarter. From here, the cottages looked like scattered embers at the foot of a mountain that had spent too many years forgetting who kept its fires burning. Somewhere within that darkness sat the home she had just left behind. Somewhere within it lingered Cassian's cough, his worn blanket, the patched chair by the hearth. The distance between that life and this room felt less like fortune than violence. When the attendants withdrew, Selwyn remained. He waited until the doors shut before speaking. "The moonstone answered a line marker," he said. "I have seen it once before in a restricted burial ledger." Leora turned from the window. "Whose?" A female named Ceres Vale. The name struck somewhere old enough to matter, Selwyn continued. She was erased from Black Hollow's public records after a succession fracture 3 generations ago. Not because she was weak, because she carried blood the Alpha line did not want remembered. Val, Leora repeated softly. My grandmother's birth line was Vale. Selwyn watched her closely. Then your blood did not awaken by accident. The room seemed to narrow around the sentence. What kind of blood? She asked. Older than the current Alpha line, tied to the Ridgekeepers who held the founding oaths before Black Hollow became what it is now. Female memory, oath law, territorial witness. The kind of line ambitious males prefer buried if they cannot control where it surfaces. Leora absorbed the words in silence. Her mother's silver ring, her grandmother's careful evasions, the way her wolf had always felt present and distant at once, like something sleeping too deeply to be natural. It all shifted. Why tell me first? She asked. Selwyn did not soften. Because Ronan is still alpha before he is a male, and right now those instincts are at war. I need one of you thinking clearly. Leora almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was so brutally accurate. Before she could answer, a knock sounded at the inner door. Ronan's scent reached the room ahead of him, cedar, iron, cold wind, and the thin metallic edge of a body being held together too hard. Selwyn's expression shut down instantly. That, he said, would be the part where clarity becomes difficult. He opened the door. Ronan stood there in a fresh black shirt, coat removed, hair damp as if someone had forced him to wash blood from his face and hands before allowing him near the rest of the house again. The effort had not fully succeeded. Leora could still scent the cost of the chamber on him. His gaze moved first to Selwyn, then to her, then to the room itself. "You're still here," he said. "I was briefing her on house security," Selwyn answered. Ronan's eyes did not leave him. "Were you—" The tension between them was quick and ugly in the way old trusts became under strain. Selwyn inclined his head by a fraction. "The eastern wing is secured. I'll return before dawn with the contract copies." He left before the room could split further. The doors shut. Silence changed shape. Without witness or interruption, the bond rose immediately, a low, dark current that had grown stronger since the moonstone, and no kinder for it. Leora stood beside the hearth and felt the room react to his presence all over again. Ronan remained near the door for one long moment, as though crossing the distance would either restore him or finish breaking whatever control he had dragged back over himself since the chamber. Then he moved. He crossed to the table, poured water from the crystal decanter, drank half of it, and set the glass down with more precision than ease. "You should be resting," she said. "You sound disappointed." "No, I sound observant." One corner of his mouth almost shifted. The bond answered the almost before she could stop herself, and she despised that. Ronan rested both hands lightly on the back of a chair. "You stepped away from me in the chamber." There it was. Leora held his gaze. "Yes. Deliberately, yes." The answer landed hard enough to alter his breathing by a fraction. He let the silence stretch, perhaps expecting her to fill it with apology or explanation. She did neither. "You know what it did," he said. "Good." That reached him. The scent of him deepened, darkening with territorial heat, with the wolf beneath his discipline reacting to refusal not by retreating, but by narrowing all its focus on the female who had imposed it. Leora felt a sharp, dangerous satisfaction at that, and immediately caged it. "Use it. Do not drown in it." He took one step closer. She held her ground. "You are very calm for a female whose entire life was rewritten in one night," he said. A brief, humorless breath left her. "You mistake silence for calm." That struck deeper than he expected. She saw it in the hardening of his expression, in the quick understanding that she had not emerged from the chamber untouched. She had simply chosen not to bleed where the room could watch. His gaze dropped to her bandaged palm. The healer said the wound should have closed faster. You spoke to the healer. I speak to everyone who handles something that bleeds under my roof. Possessive. Controlled. Honest enough to matter. What did the healer say? She asked. That the moonstone did more than react to your blood. It forced dormant wolf response through channels that should already have been active. Meaning someone suppressed part of your line, he said. The thought chilled her more than the night had. Before she could answer, his gaze sharpened. What did Selwyn tell you? That he noticed, that he cared, that his control hated being excluded. He told me the room saw less than it thought and more than it understood. The answer did not satisfy him. Good. He also told me, she added, that your control is at war with your instincts. A long silence followed. And what do you think? Ronan asked. Leora looked at him properly then. The illness had come closer to the surface in private, the tension in his jaw, the faint pallor beneath his skin, the way his posture was too exact, as though his body had to be forced into discipline before it betrayed him. Yet the power in him remained enormous. That was what made him dangerous. He could be dying and still feel like the most powerful thing in any room. I think you are used to crises becoming manageable once you decide where to place the walls, she said, and I think tonight did not ask your permission before changing shape. He inhaled slowly. No. The honesty tightened something low in her chest. Not because it made him easier, because it exposed scale. He stepped closer to the hearth. The cuff of his left sleeve shifted and revealed the edge of fresh bandaging. Her eyes went there. He noticed. And because he was Ronan, because he seemed incapable of allowing vulnerability to remain passive around her now, he slid the point of a knife under the linen tie and pulled the wrapping loose. Do not be absurd, Leora snapped. He ignored her. The wound beneath was not long, but it was ugly. A deep claw score reopened by strain, surrounded by older marks that said too much about the way leadership had lived on his body for years. Bite dents, silvered cuts. Half-healed damage turned familiar. Leadership is untidy, he said. No, Leora replied, stepping forward before she decided to. That is concealment. She took his wrist and turned the wound toward the firelight. He went still. The room changed around the contact. The bond sharpened instantly, heat traveling up her arm and striking straight through the center of her chest. His pulse beat hard beneath her fingers, strong and then briefly wrong. She focused on the wound because if she did not, she would become too aware of other things, the warmth of him, the force of his body held too carefully still, the way his breathing had altered at her touch. You tore the healing scab in the chamber, she said. Yes, because you nearly killed Merrow. His jaw shifted. I showed restraint. That almost made her laugh. Almost. She reached for fresh linen and resin salve set out by the healer and cleaned the wound without asking permission. The action steadied her. Practicality always had. This is a poor idea, he said quietly. Agreed. Her answer came too quickly. Something rough and dangerous flickered through his face at that, nearly amusement, nearly hunger, nearly something neither of them could afford. When she tied the clean bandage, she began to step back. His hand closed around her wrist. Not hard, certain. The room fell silent all over again. The bond flared. Heat rushed up her arm and struck deep enough to make her breath shorten. Her wolf rose under her skin, fiercely alert, not soothed, only awake. Ronan's thumb rested once against the inside of her pulse. Then he let go. On purpose. That self-control should not have mattered. It did. His voice had roughened by the time he spoke again. I know your condition. It took her a second to understand. Then she did. Her eyes sharpened dangerously. How? Not through spying. Through the physician's preparation list for the capital. He included age, maternal status, recurring weakness markers. The room felt colder. And? She asked. And nothing. She almost laughed. You know I may never give you an heir quickly. The truth entered the room cleanly and ugly. Her cycle had never properly righted itself after Cassian's birth and the winter sickness that nearly killed her 2 years later. Lower quarter healers had named it exhaustion, blood imbalance, female strain. They had also implied, in the practical, cruel tone healers often used when they wanted to sound useful rather than kind, that one weak child sometimes left a body uncertain about carrying another. She had made peace with that possibility long ago. Hearing it matter here was different. Ronan rose fully upright. I did not bring you here because I expect quick obedience from your body. The restraint in his voice was absolute, so was the force under it. I brought you here because the territory is moving toward fracture. My line is failing. My counsel is weak where it matters. And fate chose a female stronger than any of them were prepared for. The words hit hard enough to leave no room for breath. It was not tenderness. It was worse. Value spoken in a language severe enough to survive his mouth. Leora might have let it matter too much if she had been weaker. Instead, she turned it into the harder question. If I never carry your child, she asked quietly, do I still matter in this house? The answer came without pause. Yes. Silence. That one word contained too much truth, too much risk, too much of the male beneath the alpha, revealed in a line too simple to hide inside politics. He knew it the instant he said it. She knew it too. Something deepened between them, and because it deepened, it became more dangerous than before. Leora stepped back once, reclaiming distance before the bond could turn the moment into softness. Ronan let her. Barely. She crossed to the window and looked out over the black forest and moonlit snow. Somewhere beyond those ridges lay the route to the capital. Somewhere on that future road, her son would soon be moving farther from her reach than he had ever been. Tomorrow, she said, still looking out, you will give me access to the archive, the house records, and every sealed document tied to the Veil line. Behind her, a brief silence. You assume much. I assume necessity, she said. If your house expects me to carry the bond, the blood, and the council's hatred at the same time, I do not do it blind. When she turned back, he was watching her with that same dangerous focus he seemed incapable of moderating anymore. Yes, he said, you will have them. The answer came low and final. The room quieted. Ronan moved toward the desk by the hearth, opened the lower drawer, and removed a ring of keys threaded on black leather. Iron, silver, one so old it had darkened almost black with age. He held them out to her. The Eastern Archive cabinet, he said. The writing desk. The records room beside the mate's library. Her fingers brushed his as she took them. The bond struck once, quick and punishing. Do not open the black iron door beneath the north stairs without me, he added. Why? Because that is where my father kept the things he did not want this house to read while he lived. The answer settled hard between them. Do you know what is inside? His mouth hardened. Enough to know I was not meant to. That mattered too. Leora tucked the keys into the fold of her dress. Then we start there. The look he gave her then was almost frightening in its intensity. Respect, desire, recognition, the beginnings of dependence neither of them could afford. At dawn, he said. She inclined her head once. He turned for the door, then stopped with one hand on the frame as if the body inside him had taken one sharp payment more than the room had seen. He recovered before most wolves would have noticed. Leora was no longer most wolves. Without turning, he said, If anyone in this house disrespects you, use my name once. If that fails, use your own. Then he left. The suite went quiet. Leora stood alone in the firelight with the keys in her hand and the shape of a new life closing around her from every direction. She did not move at first. Then she crossed to the desk, opened a blank ledger and began to write. Names first. Ceres Vale, Selwyn, Bram, Merrow, Tavia, Ronan. Then motives, threats, assets, roots. By the time Moraine returned with fresh linens and broth, the Eastern Suite no longer looked like a room prepared for a future mate. It looked like a war room. Moraine took in the open pages, the ink, the sharpened stillness in Leora's face, and said, "Shall I lay out your nightclothes, my lady?" Leora did not look up. "No. Lay out the house maps." A brief pause. Then Moraine bowed. At once. There it was, the first real shift in the house itself, not because anyone had announced it, because service had recognized command. Chapter 6. The house learns her name. Morning came to the Alpha house in disciplined layers, bells in the lower corridors, servants moving before sunrise, the scent of bread and tea traveling through heated stone, the quiet rustle of a house pretending it had not shifted violently overnight. Leora had slept very little. The moonstone still lived beneath her skin, so did the chamber. So did Ronan's blood on the edge of discipline, and the unbearable knowledge that the house now knew what he was to her and what she might be to it. Moraine brought dark wool, hot water, and a breakfast summons no one had bothered dressing in kindness. Lady Bram, Lady Corris, and Tavia Merrow requested the pleasure of receiving her in the morning room. Requested meant demanded. Pleasure meant assessment. Good. Leora dressed in severe green, plain enough to refuse decorative gratitude and sharp enough to let the house understand she had not arrived to be arranged into softness. When she entered the morning room, the three females were already seated at a round table, dressed in silver, winter fruit, warm bread, and too much civility to be trusted. Lady Bram wore old authority like jewelry. Corris looked polished enough to cut with a smile. Tavia looked composed in the way wounded vanity often did, just before it turned vicious again. Leora took the remaining chair without waiting to be invited. That was the first strike. Lady Bram smiled first. "You have altered the house quickly." "Have I?" Leora asked. Corris buttered bread with elegant fingers. The Eastern Suite does not usually open without proper festivities, formal blessing, or the consent of the female circle. There was not much time for ceremony, Leora said. The mountain was busy watching its council fail. Silence. Tavia stiffened. Corris's mouth hardened. Lady Bram's smile thinned but did not break. "We are trying to understand the scale of this change," Bram said. "One does not wake expecting an Omega widow from the lower quarter to be seated where future Alpha heirs were meant to stand." Leora lifted her cup. "And yet here you are, adjusting." That landed. Corris leaned back, cool and sharp. "You mistake novelty for permanence." "No," Leora said. "You mistake discomfort for authority." The room chilled. Tavia set down her spoon too carefully. "Since we are being plain, perhaps you can tell us whether you intend to become Alpha Ronan's mate in truth or only in law." There it was. Not politics. Jealousy sharpened into public inquiry. Leora looked at her until the younger woman's composure began to strain. "The Alpha's private life," Leora said, "is not your breakfast privilege." Tavia flushed. Lady Bram intervened smoothly. "A house can survive political disorder. Emotional disorder is harder." "If you mean the bond," Leora said, "say the bond." No one moved. Corris recovered first. "You are direct." "I am tired," Leora answered. That disarmed them more than aggression would have. She was not pleading entry, not trying to charm, not smoothing herself into something easier for them to accept. She was simply there, exhausted and unbreakable enough to say the ugly thing aloud. By the time breakfast ended, she had what she needed. Bram was the mind, Corris the knife, Tavia the open wound. None of them liked her. All of them now understood underestimating her would be expensive. At midday, the contract was signed in the law room. Ronan stood opposite her, the lawkeeper between them, Selwyn at the wall, Moraine as witness. The clauses were read aloud one last time. Cassian's protection, her independent standing, consent, inheritance, correction rights, travel rights, medical obligation beyond conception. Leora signed first, then added beneath her name, Born of Concealed Veil line. The lawkeeper stared. Ronan took the pen and signed beneath her, then wrote, Alpha of Black Hollow, witness to return. That was the true seal, not marriage alone. Return written into law. When the wax cooled, Tavia intercepted them in the side corridor. She stood alone this time, which made her more dangerous and less clever. The Eastern Suite must already feel smaller than you expected, she said. Ronan was already shifting toward punishment when Leora stopped him with one lift of her hand. Tavia saw that, and the fear beneath her perfume sharpened. If my son is named in your mouth again, Leora said quietly, stepping closer, I will not ask the Alpha to correct you. Tavia's chin rose. Is that a threat? It is a courtesy that struck harder than anger would have. Tavia turned away first, and this time she left understanding something she had not wanted to learn. The widow from the lower quarter had stopped surviving social war and started winning it. The North Archive opened before dusk. Selwyn and Ronan met her there. They found the female line registry cut open around a single name, Ceres Vale, status amended under closed oath. Issue sealed, line continuation withdrawn from open record. Withdrawn, not ended, hidden. Then they found the note, the female and issue go under shadow placement until the line cools. The girl child is not to be named in chamber records. Finally, in a locked portrait cabinet, they found the true wound. Ceres Vale stood painted beneath a winter ridge with one hand on the shoulder of a dark-haired little girl. The child had Leora's eyes. At the bottom of the canvas, in old script, were the words, Ceres Vale and daughter Lyra, to remain sealed unless the line returns. Leora laid her mother's hidden silver ring beside the portrait. The same crescent over Fang's seal shone inside the band. Nothing accidental remained after that. Before they could decide their next move, a runner came from the North Pass. Cassian's wagon had nearly been intercepted before dawn. 3 masked wolves had come out of the trees at the second ridge turn and forced the trail. Dane's escort had driven them back, but not before proving the route had been leaked. Ronan took the message, read it, and went very still. Were they rogues? Leora asked. No, he said. Not if they went for the wagon instead of the escort. The war room opened immediately, maps spread, riders reassigned. Selwyn marked the second ridge turn. Leora read the attack for what it was before the others finished arguing over scent and route. They were testing response time, she said. Not just the pass, not just the escort, your response. Ronan's gaze shifted to her, and something changed again. She was no longer merely attached to the problem. She was becoming the shape through which he saw it. In the hidden room beneath the north stairs, the house gave up its final buried truth. Ronan opened the black iron door with his father's key. Inside were sealed ledgers, concealed dowries, rewritten healer books, and a letter from Elara Sorn. Last keeper, under protest, you bury girls, and name it order, because female memory frightens weak males more than winter ever did. If the line returns, let it judge you by what you stole from the mothers first. The room beneath the stairs felt less like storage than a grave opened from the inside. Then Leora found the hidden map, an old keeper road curving around the second ridge turn and reconnecting with the capital route through Shrine Land no common rider would know. They rerouted Cassian immediately through Selwyn, not by written order, but through shadow stairs and stable cut. No second leak, no witness left with enough information to sell it twice. When Ronan returned, storm snow still on his shoulders, Leora stood with Alara's letter and Lyra's ribbon in her hand, and understood exactly what the buried line demanded now. Not pity, not repair, judgment. Ronan looked at the letter, at the ribbon, then at her. Every room in this house seems to contain a new reason you should walk away from me. Then do not ask for absolution because you opened the door, she said. His gaze held hers. I will not. That answer mattered. So did what followed. He told her, at last and without evasion, you matter without condition. The words struck with devastating precision, not because they healed anything, but because they did not. They only deepened the cost of everything between them. "Then prove it," she said. "How? You do not protect me by owning me. You protect me by helping me uncover every female your line buried and giving me the power to decide what Black Hollow becomes when I find them." The silence after that was immense. Then Ronan bowed his head once and said, "You will have it." That was the true oath of the opening arc. Not surrender, not romance. A dying alpha asking for an heir and receiving instead a female who intended to make his mountain remember. Chapter 7. The Full Moon Assembly. By nightfall the storm had not yet broken, but the mountain could feel it gathering. Black Hollow called a full moon assembly anyway. Packs like this preferred their turning points witnessed. News had already outrun the house. Moonstone, bond, contract, buried blood, the near attack on the wagon. The assembly would not calm that. It would give it shape. The central court filled beneath torchlight. Warriors, elders, healers, servants, lower quarter wolves drawn upward by fear and fascination. High-born females grouped in elegant clusters that smelled of calculation more than loyalty. Leora stood beneath the western arch while Moraine fastened the dark clasp at her throat. She wore black tonight, severe and unadorned, Ronan's choice, her approval. Ronan came to her in full alpha black with a silver crest at his collar. His illness rode low in his scent, hidden under command and force. He offered his arm. She took it. The bond rose between them. Not gentle, not kind, only aware. Together they stepped into the court. Silence spread. Ronan led her to the oath platform and spoke first. Black Hollow has smelled change before hearing it explained. He let the truth of that settle over the pack. Then hear the law beneath it. The contract is sealed. Leora Voss stands under my authority, under founding witness, and under the protection of Black Hollow law. Her son stands shielded by the same. A ripple moved through the lower ranks at Cassian's name. Then Ronan said the thing that changed the night. The blood Black Hollow buried has returned. The whole court seemed to brace. Only then did he step back and give her the platform. Leora looked over the faces before her. Wolves hardened by winter, rank, neglect, pride, loyalty, cruelty, endurance. She saw the lower quarter in them. She saw the house. She saw the mountain. "You have all heard what I am supposed to be by now," she said. Widow, lower quarter, omega, convenient, dangerous. Keep whichever word helps you sleep. The mountain does not change because naming it differently feels easier. No one moved. My son rides north under this pack's seal because Black Hollow remembered too late that the vulnerable are part of its strength. I did not enter this house to decorate a dying line. I entered because survival was placed before me like a bargain, and I chose to sharpen it into law. That landed. Then she gave the mountain the sentence it had earned. If Black Hollow wants strength, it will have to stop burying half of it. The wind moved through the court. Torchlight jumped. The pack heard itself in that sentence and could not unknow it. After the assembly, Tavia tried one final warning. "You think tonight changed everything." "It did," Leora said. "No, it only changed where you will be standing when the mountain turns on you." Leora met her gaze and answered with perfect calm. "Then I'll be easier to see." This time, Tavia left understanding what she had not wanted to accept before. She had already lost the room that mattered. Epilogue of the opening arc. What was buried? Dawn came pale and merciless over Black Hollow. The rerouted wagon reached the Keeper Road before sunrise. Dane's sealed message confirmed it. Cassian was fevered but stable, the capital road expected by second nightfall, no pursuit seen after the route shift. He was still moving north, still alive, still beyond her reach but beyond the first trap as well. From the eastern balcony the territory looked almost peaceful beneath frost and weak morning light. It was not. Peace was often nothing more than the pause before reckoning gathered breath again. Selwyn brought the message. Leora read it twice, folded it carefully, and let the relief settle into structure rather than collapse. "The court will ask for direction by noon," he said. "Then give it work," she answered. audit healer accounts, reassign winter grain to the lower quarter, review every servant record tied to female removals over the last 4 generations. Selwyn's expression sharpened. Going for the spine, then? That is where the rot lives. He bowed once and left her with the mountain. Ronan came a moment later and stood beside her at the rail. No coat, no ceremony. Just the hard winter male who had asked for an heir and found a reckoning instead. "Cassian will reach the capital," he said. "Yes." He looked out over Black Hollow. "And what will you do with this?" The question mattered because it was no longer about marriage. It was about power, blood, house, territory, the shape of everything ahead. Leora thought of Ceres and Lyra in the portrait, of Ilara's letter, of Cassian's hand against the wagon window, of women hidden so completely the house had begun to call their absence peace. Then she answered, "I will make it remember." The words hung between them. Ronan looked at her for a long moment. Then the faintest trace of a smile touched his mouth. Not soft, not easy. Recognition, respect, dangerous satisfaction. "That," he said quietly, "will be very difficult to survive." Leora turned her face back toward the mountain. Then Black Hollow had better learn quickly. The wind rose over the ridge. Below them the house adjusted its bones. Far to the north, a small wagon rolled toward survival under hidden roads and guarded snow, and high above it all, the buried female line of Black Hollow stood beside the dying Alpha, and understood the full truth of what fate had done. He had asked for an heir. Instead, the mountain had given him a reckoning.